I connected with this fellowship 13 or 14 years ago, first as an occasional attendee, then as a guest minister, and now for the past year and a half as your minister. It has been wonderful to come to know and be part of this unique Unitarian Universalist congregation. Now, in some ways, it's very much the same as the congregation in Massachusetts that I served for so many years. People are people with similar needs for community, for support in difficult times, for spiritual growth and inspiration, certainly for the desire to promote justice and to help those in need. Congregations are always creating and recreating themselves, but I think this fellowship is at a very, very exciting point in that process. The congregation I served for many years just turned 335 years old and has 10th generation members. It has a Paul Revere bell in its 100-foot steeple, and some people still hold deeds to the pews that their ancestors had purchased in 1848 when the present meeting house was built. Great people from the past live on in the stories and in the gifts that they've given to the church. It has many long-standing traditions. You know, the annual harvest fair that has been happening at this time of year, for instance, for the last 150 or so years. As its 37th settled minister, it was wonderful to be part of a great tradition. I guess you can say that they are a very mature congregation. And in that respect, the UU Fellowship of San Miguel is very different from the congregation where I am Minister Emeritus. You know, many of you know, I'm sure, that in our tradition, when a teenager is transitioning to become an adult in our congregation, we have a wonderful program that we offer, and we call it Coming of Age. Well, just as a child grows into an adult, a congregation matures as well. This is what I believe is happening here, right now. We, as a fellowship, are coming of age. And personally, although I love being part of a great tradition, I'm truly excited to be serving a congregation in such a different place. In some ways, the ministerial skills and experiences that I bring are even more needed than they were in that wonderful, mature congregation. I find what this congregation, the UU Fellowship of San Miguel de Allende, has done over the last 33 years or so of its history to truly be amazing. I hope you read the articles in the newsletter about our Magic Fellowship describing all this. From an incredible social justice program to profound engagements with issues of our time, as well as those timeless issues, those issues of the spirit that affect all our lives, from caring for one another to caring for the greater community. We have been caught up in the doing, focusing on the here and now. Our bandwidth has been pretty full, and our thinking mostly short term. You know, this week's service, this month's committee meeting, this year's budget. But now we have come to a point where we can, and I think we must, think beyond just the needs of the moment and think about the future and about ways to ensure that the things that have become so important to us will be available to those who come after us. But more than that, we are a voice of liberal religion here in the middle of Mexico. We are a place that opens our doors wide to welcome those whom other religions find unacceptable because of who they are or what they do or don't believe. Of course, what we do for the greater community is so important, but so is just being here. Having a vibrant UU congregation in the middle of Mexico is important, not just for us, but for the entire community. And I believe it is important that it thrive and grow and shine the light of its principles and values here in Mexico, even after we're all gone. It's important to do the work of justice now, to care for this institution in the present. But we have now reached a point where I believe we can and we need to take a longer view. So I'd like to share with you a story that illustrates what I'm talking about. It's going to take us away from Mexico and into the world of English universities. You probably know that English universities are made up of many different colleges, each with their own dean and fellows, their own traditions, and their own Great Hall. The Great Hall is often the center of the life of the college, where the faculty and the students alike come together for dining and all sorts of gatherings together. Students, faculty, and alumni all take great pride in their college, and in particular, in their Great Hall. This story is about a great hall at one of the colleges at Oxford University called New College. Now, that name can certainly be a little bit misleading. You see, New College received its charter in 1379, and it's believed that their great hall was already built at that time, probably constructed in 1367. It is a beautiful hall with massive oak beams in its ceiling, pegged together to support the great span of roof. The ceiling is considered to be a masterpiece of medieval joinery. As such, one interested student decided to write his thesis on the joinery of this period and went to the attic above the Great Hall to examine how that structure was pieced together. What the student discovered was that the huge beams were infested with powder post beetles. He reported his discovery to the board, and they called a meeting. Now, there was great concern among the board members. Something had to be done right away. Could beams this size of the ancient timbers even still be available today to replace them? And if they were, what on earth would they cost? Would they lose their great hall entirely, and in so doing lose a piece of English heritage? The Great Hall was so important that some board members wondered if the college could survive its loss. One timid member of the board remembered that there was a college forester on the payroll and suggested that perhaps they should seek his advice. No one really knew much about the forester. They know he managed some forest which belonged to the college, but no one had seen him at the university in years. And it was considered by most a rather anachronistic position, similar to the college swankeeper or the college fletcher. So much of the board thought that this was probably a silly suggestion, but nonetheless they summoned the forester to Oxford for a board meeting. The board explained the problem to the forester and asked him if oak timbers of the required quality and size were even available today, and if so, what would they cost? And then, to their great surprise, the forester replied, "Well, gentlemen, I was wondering when you'd ask that." It seems that when New College received its charter back in 1379, a grove of oak trees was planted on the first piece of land that was bequeathed to them. They were planted for the specific purpose of replacing the beams in New College Hall when those beams became infested with beetles, as it is known that oak always falls prey to beetles in the end. He related how the purpose of those trees had been passed down from forester to forester for 600 years. Each would tell the next, "You take care of those trees. You don't cut those oak trees. Those are for the roof of New College Hall." Well, the oak trees were cut and milled and used to replace the infested beams and restore the hall. And then acorns were sown on the land where the trees had been harvested, because as everyone knows, eventually all oaks fall prey to beetles. You know, like that college's great hall, we have something wonderful right now. It's not a great building, but a great fellowship. It too will face challenges in the future, and we don't know what those challenges will be or when they will occur. We certainly didn't anticipate a virus requiring us to completely change the way we do things and dramatically interrupt our usual stream of donations that we receive in the collection baskets as they're passed each week. But you know, fortunately, we had some cash reserves, which have not only allowed us to continue our Sunday services and all our community events and meet our obligations to our nonprofit, they've also allowed us to go much further than that, to be able to respond very generously to the hardship that this virus has imposed on the greater community. These reserves were a blessing and wisely held as a rainy day fund. And the rain came. Our own history in this very moment demonstrates powerfully why we need an endowment. So whether or not cash reserves happen to be available, there will be funds to turn to in times of extraordinary needs. But it's not just for crisis situations that we need an endowment. You know, we're really growing now with well over 200 members and more friends. And the potential to connect with more people who seek this kind of a spiritual home, people who are here in San Miguel, people who are in other parts of Mexico, people who are all over the US and Canada and beyond. That potential is almost unlimited. You know, we're just starting to move beyond being a congregation of all gringo retirees to one now with more Mexicans and with children and young families joining us. We have grown our staff and our numbers of committed and volunteers, which has enabled us to serve our members and our friends and reach out to the greater community in new and in varied ways. Right now, an envisioning committee is thinking ahead for us, thinking about what that long view might be, and the ideas circulating are really very exciting. Some could become a reality in a fairly short time, but others will likely come after perhaps we're gone. An endowment is not just about maintaining what we have. It is a way of enabling us to be even better in the future. You know, Confucius once reminded us, people who don't think far enough ahead inevitably have worries near at hand. And truth be told, so often most of us prefer to focus on our momentary needs or our momentary enjoyment of things. You know, we do it at a personal level in our lives all the time, and even with some big things like maybe not preparing sufficiently for retirement or other major things that come to us. But you know, I think nowhere is our failure to take a long view any more clear at a societal level than it is with the issue of climate change in our time, as well as many other short-sighted political decisions that are now being made. So whether it's in our own personal life, or in the life of our planet, or our country, or in the life of our fellowship, it's not easy to take the long view, but it's so necessary. Indeed, it's much easier to just go along with things the way they've always been. And when you do that, is when you begin on a path of decline, rather than on either the road of preservation of a wonderful institution or the embrace of new and greater possibilities. Taking the long view and acting in accord with it can require some sacrifice on our part, just as those before sacrificed to leave us the various legacies they have. So how do we get there? Well, first, I think we need to think about a time beyond our own time. Most of us are in our senior years, and it's a time when it's appropriate to think about what we will pass on to future generations. Yes, to our family, and our friends. But also, I think it's time to think about what we can pass on to institutions and organizations that will continue to advance what we value, continue to speak to issues on which we would still like to have our voices heard, continue to create the beloved community that we have so much appreciated. We will not get to see it all, but we have known the journey, and we have a glimpse of the future that is beyond us. This week, as I was thinking of this service, I thought about the biblical story of Moses. Moses led his people through the desert for 40 years in search of a promised land. Moses and most of the older people with whom he left Egypt did not get there, but their descendants did. But Moses does go to that mountain, and from the top of it gets a glimpse of the future he has worked so hard to create for his people, but will not himself enjoy. And he finds peace and just getting a glimpse of what his legacy will be. Those of us who have been blessed to live long and rewarding lives, who have been given to us in our time, are indeed fortunate to be able to contemplate how we might continue to give after we're gone. For sure, we'll live on in the lives we have touched and the good examples we've been, but we also have the opportunity to intentionally say, this is how I want to be part of the future, even generations after I'm gone. It's not a morbid thought to think about your legacy, but an empowering thought. We need to embrace a spirit of generosity, not just for present causes and individuals, but towards the future. True generosity is always about giving without regard to anything that you'll receive back. When we give to projects of the moment, we do often get to witness the results of our giving. When we give to the future, it is extraordinarily selfless and trusting generosity, because often we will not get to see the results. Generosity to the needs of the present has been a hallmark of this congregation, and I believe generosity to the future will be as well. The hymn we sang leading into the sermon is one of my favorites. It talks about how you live your life in this moment, but it ends with these words: then, when life is done for me, let love be my legacy. Isn't that what we really all want? And does it not raise the question for all of us to ponder? What will our legacy of love look like? Planting those trees 600 years ago was a legacy of love for that college and for the future generations who would attend it. Those 14th century academics wanted to see this institution endure to serve for hundreds of years into the future. Just as I know we want this fellowship here in the middle of Mexico to be thriving long after we're gone. Legacies of love connect us to our past and our future. As a faith tradition, we recognize the interconnectedness with each other and with all creation. We recognize the effects of actions we take. The way we live our lives reaches beyond us. In our seventh principle, we recognize that we are part of an interconnected web of all existence. But you know what? That web is one that is not limited to the present. Its threads reach back into the past and extend our connection into the future, even when we'll not be present. In the words of one of my colleagues, Victoria Safford, we here right now are standing on the solid ground of the present, and we are leaning over time to touch the future. How will you touch the future? What will your legacy be? I hope you will leave lessons and good memories and resources, if you're able, to family and friends who will lovingly make good use of these gifts and be inspired by your teachings and examples long after you're gone. I also hope that your legacy of love will help to pass on this fellowship even better than it was when we received it to those who come after us. I hope your legacy will be supporting an organization that continues to speak up for what you value, even after you are no longer able to do so. Your gifts of time and talent and financial resources, both for the present and for the future, all contribute to the ongoing creation of a beloved community that not only exists in the present, but crosses the barriers of time. A community where those who have gone before us and those who will come after us are one with us right now. Many of us don't have great financial resources and give to this fellowship in so many other ways to help create our future. And thank you for that. But if you are able, I invite you to consider a gift now, whatever you can afford, or one made by bequest after you're gone to the UU Fellowship of San Miguel de Allende Endowment.